Ephesians chapter 6 tonight, and we'll begin at verse number 1, read down through verse 4 tonight. And appreciate many of you, your encouragement today as we studied a bit of a tough subject, and hopefully that worked in your heart as it has mine. Isn't it interesting that when we preach the whole counsel of God, there's just, even those difficult sections of Scripture, there's liberty that comes with that, there's joy that comes with that, and it's just been striking to me this week as I prep for our study today on hell, how beneficial it was to my worship, to my fellowship with God, and I hope that you'll let that continue to work in your heart as well. Ephesians chapter 6, let's stand for a moment if you're able to do so, and we'll begin in verse 1 as we continue our series on home improvement, and we find this as our text tonight. Ephesians chapter 6, let's begin in verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so I want to continue tonight on elements God has given in His Word, that if we will integrate them into our homes, our marriages, parenting, grandparenting, they'll improve our homes with God's help. And tonight I want to look at this subject, improving with God's respect. Respect is definitely an issue, right, in our culture. I don't know if you track the news even this morning. We were talking about the crisis in Nice this morning. And between then and now, we've had another police shooting, the authorities being basically look like almost ambushed, and then the shooter in the hospital, and it just continues and continues and continues. And how do we start in our homes being catalysts for change to instill in each other a healthy reverence for God and for one another? Let's pray and ask the Lord to help us. Father, thank you tonight for your word. Lord, if there's anything we need in our day, it's a greater reverence of you. First, God, when it comes to your holiness, as we studied this morning, in its application of salvation, and now tonight as we consider in our homes, where God, men in this room, if we're honest, many times disrespect our wives and our kids, and up the other side of the food chain from the bottom up, same thing is transpiring. And God, we pray that you would help us tonight to see our part in supporting and respecting and being what we should be in reference to ultimately your authority in our lives and in our families. And I pray that each of us would see the application for us, and that we would be the proper authority and influence in others as you give us that opportunity. Bless now this study, be honored how it's preached, how it's heard, how each of us live it out this week, and we'll thank you for it in Christ's name. Amen. You may be seated. Thank you. I read a sad story the other day true story of a elderly gentleman, 88 years of age, and according to the story, 78 years of age. The gentleman's name was Sahayaka, and Sahayaka was in a Costco and had, obviously his ethnic background seems to come out from the name there, and he was walking through a Costco. I don't know if you've been in a Costco or Sam's Club ever, where you buy truckloads of food at a time, just in case you might need, that huge portion of whatever you buy. But to Sam's Club or Costco, he was in a Costco. You know how they have like those food samples, like where they're trying to push or promote, hey, buy a 30-gallon tub of this peanut butter, try one little speck on a cracker, that kind of a dynamic. And so this gentleman, 78 years of age, was walking through, and the news story was telling the account through his experience, his eyes. And he walked up to it was a display for Nutella. Any of you like Nutella? All right, we have some in our family. They'll eat it on everything, including their own finger, just lick it off. They love that stuff. It's kind of a chocolate or hazelnut type spread. And so he was walking up to a display. Vendor is trying to push or promote the product. And there were probably, according to the story, 20 to 30 little like little paper cups, or, you get like ketchup in or something at a restaurant, at a fast food restaurant. And they had just a little bit in each of them. And so as he walked up, this young guy in his early 20s cut in front of him and began to just pick up every cup and devour the whole display. Well, as this young man is working, sweet 78-year-old man just tried to edge over to the corner and pick up the last one that was left. And as he went to grab it, they reached kind of an altercation where the gentleman said, "Can I just have this last one?" Guy turned to him, 20s, and just punched this man. Now, I don't know about you, I'm concerned about where we're at when it comes to respect. Even my era, and I'm not that far along in my walk with the Lord and my life experience, but I have observed a decline in respect. First of all, respect people who we should respect, being respectable. And number two, those of us who have a relationship with authority, many times that is lacking. And so the question tonight is, how do we start at the most basic, foundational component of society, which is your home and mine, and how do we push against that? How do we counter that, be countercultural, and instill into our young people and even encourage our spouse or maybe our grandchild or some other relationship in the home to have a proper respect? So what I want to look at tonight are 3 developmental convictions that will, if you instill these aspects of respect, you will see respect go up in your home, in your heart, in your marriage, in your parenting, in the response that you have from your kids and grandkids. The first conviction is this: number 1, we need to expect respect. Can I tell you tonight that if you're an authority figure, if you have a child, if you have a grandchild, if you have someone that works for you, if you have leadership in the setting of the local church, if you have any leadership responsibility, it is your obligation to expect the respect of those who follow you, and none more should we expect respect from than from our children. That's a God-given, not right, but a responsibility. And that's something that we really need to change our view. And I think many times we almost apologize for expecting there to be some reverence or respect given to the person that's in authority. And a lot of different venues, some of you have employees, you know what that's like. Where to expect it is often seen as an ego trip or some other distortion of that. And so we need to, as parents, expect respect from our kids. Why so? Well, the foundation of it is found here in our text. Look back at verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother. Number 1, we have the right to expect respect when we use the Bible command as the foundation of that expectation. So the Bible, I know this is simple as we kind of lay the foundation, but authority and respect and expecting respect is not a man-contrived view of things. It is God-ordained, and clearly we see it referenced here in the context of the home. You could jot down these 2 references. First, you see the word obey, or the command of obedience. I don't have these on the slides tonight, but you could jot down 2 biblical commands God gives here. First, to obey. This carries with it the idea of listening to instruction and then heeding it. One of the best ways that we can encourage our children to demonstrate respect is to listen. Wow, that's a challenge, isn't it? I know as a child I was not the best listener. Dad, what was that again for the 5th time? What was that, Mom, for the 10th time? Listening, and number 2, heeding it. Hearing and obeying, acting on what the instruction is. And that's something we need to work at in our families. Godly parents are servant leaders in the home. Though we are not to lord over our children or like a demanding boss or an authoritative dictator, you are to lovingly serve them. And one of the best things you can do to serve them is to require obedience of them. No greater disservice do we do to our children than when we say something that we don't expect them to hear or expect them to respond to and obey. And so we need to be very careful with that. By the way, have you noticed in your home, if you're not careful, if your kids are able to, I don't know if I've told this in the setting before, but have you ever noticed how we try to get our kids to walk and talk, come on, honey, say daddy or say mama, and then you want them to take those first few steps. I think you've heard me say, I think it was Paul Harvey once said, we try to get our kids to talk and walk, and then we say after a couple of days of that, sit down and shut up. That's our, okay, that's enough talking, enough walking. But as your children develop, they begin to dialogue. Here I've noticed this to be true. Have you noticed with your children, if you're not careful by default, it becomes more discussion and debate than it does giving out loving, but gentle and gracious and firm requirements of your children? This may help you. This is something not original with my wife and I, and we don't do this as well as we should. But it's an idea we've tried to implement and we have to constantly work at, and is this. We allow our boys to ask something. If we ask them to do something or instruct them to do something, they're able to ask a question or get clarification if it's in the right spirit. But then here's our response after we answer. Because we get into this. If you notice this, I did as a kid. Is that debate or discussion, we will say this: you asked, I answered, Now go do it. And I think many of the parents in this room, you got too much dialogue going on. And what creeps into that dialogue is often a tone of disrespect. I don't think we have to debate and discuss for hours, honey, now you know why, and this is why mom and dad have committed. That may come up now and then, but not constantly rehashing. It's you ask, I've answered, period. Let's move forward in the home. And so obedience is to be expected in the home. It's clearly given, isn't it? Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. All right, the second biblical command found in verse 2 is, notice it says, honor thy father and mother. And this would even translate into us who are adults who still have children on this or parents on this earth, or even honoring their memory. If you would put down this definition after the word honor, it means to value or to revere someone. To value or to revere someone. Now, this is where we drop the ball in our parenting. And I hope, again, I've tried to say this many times just so you understand. I'm not lecturing down to you like, hey, check out what we've got going. We've got the perfect home. We are counter that many times in our own family. But I've noticed that in our lives, many times we expect our kids to do what we say, but that's where we stop. One author I was reading said this, our children are not just to do what we say, but also to value the relationship, to give respect to the one giving the command. And so the idea here is not only is there, sure, I'll take out the garbage, but the whole time there's attitude on the way out and on the way in, but there's actually a value of relationship with the authority. Authority nowadays is seen as more of an enemy many times, or seen as counter our own convenience and comfort, and the Bible teaches we are to give value or reverence to the person who is an authority. Back in 1947, a Harvard sociology professor named Dr. Carl Zimmerman traced the historical disintegration of cultures to the disintegration of families. And he said this, according to his list of indicators for deterioration, quote, there were fewer children and less respect for parents and parenthood. And that's what we're living in, aren't we? Don't have kids, they're an inconvenience. If you do have them, if you must have them, do it in this fashion. And so there's a view of a lower view of parenting, and obviously that affects our young people as well. Just a quick example. Pastor Nathan, Pastor Dave, and I were out at a conference in California, and we flew all day on a Sunday evening to get there for the conference on Monday. And it was like, I don't know, probably about midnight. We're sitting on a shuttle bus. It had been like 3 o'clock time here. So we're just zombies. And at least I was. They were, Dave, he just keeps going. I think he's in California again, isn't he, Brandy? San Diego area, or coming back tomorrow. But anyway, so we're sitting there trying to get to our hotel and be done for the night. And I was sitting there, and those buses you sit sideways. We're going from the airport terminal to our rental car. And this young guy came and sat by me. We kind of just made small talk for a minute. And then this foreign family came in, and they had 4 or 5 kids, but they had it literally, I'm not exaggerating, I think almost 30 pieces of luggage, strollers. I mean, it looked like they were moving their whole family from one side of the country to the other. And I just kind of got this body language from this young guy beside me, he just kept watching them file in, and then drag in 3 more suitcases and slam it on top of a shelf. And finally, he turned to me and said, kind of in a haze and a late night, he's like, dude, that's why I'm never having kids. That was his assessment of this situation. Do you know that in our culture today that there's a devaluation of parenting? Don't tell me that doesn't affect the psyche of our children. When it's seen as an inconvenience to be a parent instead of a calling, when it's kind of a sidebar to our careers or other things we have going. And so this honor is not just to be expected from our children, but it is to be something we strive for, to be honorable, to see the relationship as something of value. Maybe the reason our kids don't value us is we don't value them in a way that pleases and honors the Lord. See, providing leadership in the home not only provides the direction your children need, it also helps them develop a sense of respect for all authority. Other authority they'll have to obey, other authority that they will have the privilege of honoring. And I'm telling you, a child that hits college with this in tow, a healthy reverence of authority, listen to me, is light years ahead of their peers who have not. And that struggle through their 20s and 30s, and even I've met senior men who are still egomaniacs resisting authority that God has put in their life. So we train them from the jump. We teach them that it's a biblical command to obey authority, to honor authority. And God will bless them through that effort. All right, number 2. The second area that we need to expect respect is with wise correction. So what do we do after we've given them commands, and then we all know that there's going to be violations of that command, there's going to be inconsistencies? How do we handle that? The other day I heard someone, I'm sure you've heard different lists of how your first child, you coddle them and everything's just, the environment has to be perfect, and by the second or third child you forget their name, that kind of thing. The other day I heard a sequence, someone said this: first child eats dirt, mom calls the doctor. Second child eats dirt, mom cleans out mouth. And then this is the best one. Third child eats dirt, mom wonders if she really needs to feed him lunch. Don't you ever get there where it's just like, is it even worth it to get involved in this situation, especially as the years go by? How do we correct our child in a way that pleases the Lord with wisdom? Now, here's a statement. I would encourage you to jot this down. We'll unpack this in just a moment. Where we often lose respect in our families, listen to me, where we often lose respect in our families is not the rebellion of our children. It is the response to the rebellion of the parent. Let me give that to you again. Where we often lose respect in our families is not in the rebellion of our children, but in the unwise response to the rebellion of the parent. And I'm telling you, nothing kills respect more. We all know kids are going to have attitude. We had it as a child, didn't we? But it's our unwise response or management of that. Man, it just buries us in this area of authority and respect. All right, so what are some things in Scripture that God gives in this area of wise correction? Look, if you will, at verse 4. We'll come back to the end of verse 2 and verse 3 in just a moment. And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. We'll come back to that phrase as well. But bring them up in the nurture, notice this, in admonition, has the idea of correction, and the admonition of the Lord. And so the first word that's given here, instruction, or in this area of wise correction, is the word admonition. Some of you need to work at this. I've observed your parenting style. I'm not always taking notes on you, and I hope you're not taking notes on me, but I have observed, by and large, we're pretty easygoing people in our church. And I've noticed many times we set boundaries, but then we don't enforce them. That's where we lose it. And I want to just encourage you tonight that God requires of parents not just a setting of boundaries. Hey, look at all these standards and convictions we have, but here's how we handle when those are crossed over and when those are violated with wisdom. I want to give you a few Old Testament verses, a couple in the Old and one in the New, that I think will help you in implementing that. Go to Proverbs, if you would, please, chapter 13. Proverbs 13, and if you would, please, verse 24. And this carries with it the idea of these verses of how to correct and what to keep in mind as we do administer correction to our young people. Proverbs 13, and if you would, please, verse 24. The Bible says this: he that spareth his rod hateth his son, Proverbs 13:24, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. And I think you've heard me say before, don't ever use the word punish in your parenting. It's not I'm punishing you, it's I'm correcting you. If God ever punished us, we'd be in hell right now as we studied this morning. But God corrects his children. And so because they're our kids, we correct them. And one of the tools that we use is here the rod of correction. He that spares it hates his son. He that loves him chastens him betimes. And the word betimes there, it's an Old English term, carries with the idea of timely, within a short time, or soon. There's not a huge gap of time between the offense, and the kids would love if there was more of a gap. Dad may eventually forget, or mom will just forget what was going on, but there's a short gap between the offense and the consequence or the correction that follows. This speaks to a parent who corrects their child early in life when correction can be less severe and have more of an impact. No matter what, listen to me, your child is going to be corrected. The difference is you love your child. You have a God-given responsibility to your child. A correction officer does not have that. He maybe is a government official representing government that is God-ordained, but he doesn't care for your child like you do. He's going to mete out punishment and consequences that will hurt and sting much deeper than what you can give them at an early age. And so, betimes, doing it within a short time. Don't let that fester, that attitude you know is there for years and years. Deal with it shortly. Deal with it graciously but firmly and immediately. That, I think, one of the most dangerous times is between the immediate offense and the consequence that the parent metes out. We've got to be very careful with that. All right, then 23 of Proverbs, verse 15. Proverbs 22 and verse 15. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. And so, secondly, we see this correction again used, this seeing foolishness and pushing it or forcing it out with the administration of correction. I don't know if you believe this. You must not have been parenting long enough if you still believe this, but our children are not angels with very occasional relapses into sinfulness. If anything, they're the exact opposite. Now and then they act like angels. The rest of the time they're a bunch of heathens, just like we are. And so the idea is that it's in their heart. It's a part of who they are on their very DNA. The foolishness, the word foolishness that's used here is not talking about childish behavior. Whoops, I bumped over a glass of milk, or I tracked in something from the yard. It's talking about willfulness, obstinance, direct disobedience toward authority, and it is bound in the heart of a child. Don't be worried that your child is fighting against authority. That means they're a child. It's bound in there, and so we have to correct them to bring that out. And if your child seems to be compliant, I don't know if you've ever studied on different versions of rebellion, but there's what is called a passive rebel. And they work things to get their way, and they do it in a more subtle way. Every child's a rebel. Every child has this foolish resistance to authority within their heart. And so the rod of correction drives that from them. And we won't get into corporate punishment tonight, or discipline would be the proper term, corporal discipline. But can I just say this? Most of the examples used to counter that teaching, which is clearly given in Scripture, uses examples on the extreme. And I would just caution you with that. We may another time teach about how to administer the rod of correction, but clearly God gives us not just the option, but the command that we are to use that mechanism to correct our children. And a word I would give you, remember I mentioned the book, Shepherding a Child's Heart, last time? In Ted Tripp's book on that subject, to correct but not to bruise or hurt the child's heart, he uses the analogy of the rod of correction as a rescue mission. That you're taking them where they've stepped out from under the umbrella of authority, they've gone their own way, and you're bringing them back into right relationship with authority. That's what the rod of correction is. It's not chasing them around to punish them. It is to bring them, correct them, bring them back under God-given authority. And so we need to admonish our children. Wise correction. All right, last verse on this subject, Hebrews 12. Would you go there? And we'll move on. Hebrews chapter 12, and if you would, verse 7. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse number 7. And by the way, for some of you that don't have children, or this isn't as applicable in the immediate, God works the same way. And there's a lot of spiritual truths as well that God can teach us through our study. Hebrews chapter 12, and if you would please, verse 7. He says this, if you endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons, for what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if you be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are you bastards and not sons. So you're illegitimate. You are not a child of God if you are not corrected. Parents typically correct their own children. Have you ever had someone try to correct your child for you? That can create a bit of friction. Maybe you've been the one that's tried to do that, and you get the mama bear look or whatever. Back off, buddy. That's my kid. That's my responsibility. And so there's what's insinuated on that, listen to this, is this. Part of our parent-child relationship is defined not by the fun we have, but the fact that I'm the one responsible to correct you. If tonight your parenting was only defined by how successfully and high impactly you are correcting your child, what kind of relationship do you have with your child tonight? It's a part of our relationship. It actually is a validation. It's an evidence of the fact we are their parent and they are our child. Who's going to correct your child if you don't? And so God has given us and entrusted us with that responsibility. The second thing you notice in verse 9 is this is bigger than just us and our kids need to respect us as parents or grandparents. Look at verse 9. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much more after that rather be in subjection of the Father of spirits and live? And basically what happens is when we administer correction wisely and biblically, it develops not just respect for us, but a respect for God, a respect for God himself. So you can say, that's not my DNA to correct my child, or maybe your DNA is to overcorrect your child, but you need to do it in a way that honors the Lord, because ultimately it will be him that they will shape and form an opinion of. All right, now we're going to get to probably the most convicting part of our study, at least for me. I think I'm a pretty laid-back guy, but I struggle in this area just a little bit. Before we get to that, number 2 in wise correction, go back to our text in Ephesians 6, and notice the beginning of verse 4. And when we talked about the fact that our unwise response to rebellion is really what provides more resistance to authority than the rebellion itself, this would speak to that very practically. Verse 4, Ephesians 6, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. Provoke not your children to wrath. So number 1, we give to our children wisely admonition. We gave you that word. Number 2, we do it without anger. We correct wisely without anger. How many of you, when you get mad, become more sophisticated? Your mind is clear. You understand all enigmas and problems of the world. No, you become stupid, don't you? You become a bit toddler in your mindset. Anger clouds your mind. Anger clouds your mind not just in your own space, but it affects your children and your grandkids when you're administering correction with anger. May I say tonight, I believe this with all my heart, nothing ruins our correction more or quicker than when it's mixed with anger. That's a deadly concoction. And dads, especially for us tonight, we have to be very careful with that. We're right and they're wrong, but how we're addressing their wrong is just as wrong as what they did. And when we administer correction with anger, that only produces greater rebellion. Whatever type of correction you use to redirect your heart or the heart of your child, there's one thing you can add that will render it ineffective and create toxicity in your relationship, and that is anger. That substance will always do that. Quick verse on that, James chapter 1. Now, this is a verse I go to often in the areas that I have leadership to just check me where I tend to be a bit irritable or angry. James chapter 1, and if you would please, verse number 20. Context here is not dealing as much with parenting, but James 1 is to the believer, and it would spill into that area, obviously. Let's begin in verse 19. James 1, verse 19. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, why should we be slow to wrath? Notice verse 20. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. If you're mad, what follows will never be God's will. I don't care how wrong the wife is. I don't care how wrong the husband is. I don't care how wrong the neighbor is or your kid is or your grandkid is. If you respond in anger, what then goes down will always be out of bounds of what God would define as righteousness. And so our correction can never be mixed with anger. It must be fueled and sustained by something else, and that would be obviously the Holy Spirit. One writer said this, no matter how just your words may be, you ruin everything when you speak with anger. You can be right. You can be totally right. But as soon as that anger creeps in, you are now less than effective. One author I was reading said this, and I think this would apply to teenagers. Some of you are getting close to that stage, and even if you're not, you're setting up your parenting relationship already, obviously, for that. One author said this, quote, any correction when administered in anger breeds rebellion and loss of respect by your child. If you cannot control your own spirit, your child senses that, and the correction has the opposite effect you intended. You may succeed in changing her immediate behavior. That's what we all parents focus on. But the seeds of rebellion will begin to take root in her heart. And we often try to overwhelm, don't we, with anger. And we fix it. But when we realize it's in that same moment, we've begun to plant those seeds of rebellion and resistance to our influence. Colossians 3 chimes in as well, verse 21, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Strong language there. So we need to be very careful as we correct our children. We do not do it with anger. And this would be just the application. We'll move on. Commit between you and your spouse. We will never correct in anger. Make that covenant to want to, and check each other on that. Hey, I don't think you're in the mindset to do this. Let me take it from here. You're the one that was in the moment. You're ready to, nail them to the walls, we would say, not literally, but you got a lot of things in your mind you'd love to say or do. And so counter that and guard against that. And make sure that your child never receives correction from an angry heart. And if you'll do that, I guarantee God will bless you and they will have a healthy view of authority. All right, second deep conviction we need to elevate respect in our homes is found back in our text. Go to verse 2. Number 2, you notice here in verse 2, he says, honor thy father and mother. And then notice this next expression, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee and thou mayest live long on the earth. Number 2, so we expect respect. Number 2, we reward it. We reward it. My wife this last week was in charge of the craft. She knew this was going to be an illustration. I don't know if you walked by the craft room this past week, but my wife has done crafts now for, I think, since we've started the church, so 7-8 years. She's done the craft every year, crafts. And this year she got wise, and it's normally the adults as much as the kids talking while she's trying to tell everybody what you're to do in craft time. Stick this to this and cut this in two and move this over here, and then kids just start gluing stuff to each other, and she's trying to give it. And so this year she got a megaphone. And I have a picture of her standing on a chair talking down to the kids with her megaphone. Now, can I tell you, if my wife just got a bunch of kids in a room so she could yell at them with a megaphone just for a power trip, it'd be a bit manipulative, wouldn't it? But there was a reward. I know for every second she was behind the megaphone, she'd spent days, if not weeks, trying to put together, with some of your help, the materials to make a really nice craft. It's something that was a reward for the instructions being given. I think if we're not careful, we emphasize authority, but it's always a burden. It's always an inconvenience, instead of also teaching their rewards, their blessings and benefits that come when you have the proper respect and toward authority that God expects. And so if we correct disobedience, we must realize that rewarding it is even more important. All right, 2 areas that we can work at. Number 1, as is taught here in verse 2 and 3, with God's promise. With God's promise. There was an interesting story in the news this week of they have found for the first time, as far as I know, physical remains of the Philistines. For a long time they've been digging and they found some trinkets and things. But remember the Philistines like Goliath, Delilah, some of this crowd, the bad guys in the Old Testament. You kids know those stories well. And they've never been able to find human remains of them. And so the article was saying most of what we know of the Philistines has been written by their enemies, the Jews, in Scripture. And they were trying to figure out where they went, where they came from, and why they fell off the face of the earth. No one knows where they were. Would you say tonight that the trajectory of the Philistines was a bit different than the trajectory of God's people in what they had coming for them? Yeah. There's a difference, listen to me, between honoring God, obeying God, following God, that person, and one who does not. And so we need to teach that. We need to encourage and remind our kids that God's expectations always are to help us experience His promises. The promise is that if they would obey their parents, they would enjoy a prosperous and long life. That's a general principle, not always true. It's not if someone dies young, they necessarily were disrespectful to their parents. But obviously they respect authority. Life is going to go a bit easier for them. Think of Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They died a premature death because they did not respect God. They didn't respect His ark. They didn't respect His priest. They didn't respect their own father. They disrespected God and they died a young death. And so reverence leads to the experience of God's promises. And I think we need to spend more time on that. Kids, listen, if you'll honor God, He promises these things. And I want you to experience those promises. All right, then verse 4. There's a word found in the middle of verse 4 after saying not to provoke them. He says, bring them up in the nurture of the Lord. Admonition would be correction, as we talked about a moment ago, but this nurture. And this carries with it the idea of praise, that we praise them. We recognize when they are offering respect in a way that pleases the Lord. If you tonight, dads especially, if you think tonight you're going to get respect from your kids only with correction, you're a fool. And so am I. Respect is born more out of the context of praise than it is correction. And that's not a millennial thing. That's not a soft, fuzzy, warm thing of just my generation. That's something that's true always in Scripture. Praise produces greater respect. And so we need to look for the positive, catch our kids doing right, as we talked about last time, especially in this area of respect. Another article I was reading, the author said this: think about this scenario. We deal with this with our teenagers. Our world praises disrespect, and in their immaturity, peers will often praise disrespect as well. So when your child has you on one hand, always on his case, telling him how disrespectful he's become, and on the other hand, friends praising him for standing up for himself or showing who's the boss, the praise is going to be more powerful in its motivation than your correction. And we have to get out ahead of that by being the one that our kids look to for praise and affirmation, and that ought to be a regular, frequent thing in your relationship with them. Proverbs 25:11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. They will treasure the words of praise that you give to them. I don't know if you've had these two scenarios, but I've worked for both. A boss that analyzes every little detail and micromanages and legitimately criticizes things you're doing wrong over and over and over again. I want you to think about the quality of the work you put out for that boss. And think about a boss who does now and then challenge you and correct you and bring some accountability, but also notices your good points and the extra effort. And don't you do more for that one? I think many times we set our kids up for failure by, again, overanalyzing instead of making sure we're also offering and mixing in the praise. Be on the constant lookout for opportunities to praise their obedience and respect, not just toward you. That's one thing I've found to be helpful, but their respect toward other authorities. It's not just about them respecting us. And so do that, emphasize that, and praise that. All right, lastly, and this is the one that us parents aren't going to like tonight. Number 3, we have to model it. So we expect it. We reward it. And number 3, this is the key one, we model it. Can I say this before we look at a few verses that end our text tonight that we haven't read yet, beginning in verse 5? I see disrespect being generationally continued and perpetuated in families, and probably it's in my own life and family, and I'm a bit oblivious to it. It's my blind spot, where they are propagating and reproducing the same attitude that's been in that family for generation after generation. And I've seen also in families where there is the authority always, the parental authority always takes the side of authority unless demonstrably proven otherwise. And the kids just respect and the grandkids respect. And it's amazing how much of respect is just seen. It's caught instead of taught. And I hope as a result of the boys in my family, and I hope because of the kids in your family, that they will be able to share examples and think of respect as it's fleshed out through their dad and mom in the life that they live, and for us grandparents as well tonight. And so may I say tonight, though, we can't just expect and reward, we have to model it for them. As they observe you giving honor, here it is, to others, they see that respect is not just a childhood requirement, it's a life virtue. It's as much as, if not more, a part of an adult's life as it is that of a child. All right, a few practical things on that. Number 1, in verses 5 and 6, we need to show or model respect toward our superiors. Go to verse 5. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of heart as unto Christ, not with eye service, not just when they're looking, but as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. And so we model respect first toward those who are over us. Your children and mine will ultimately develop an attitude in response to authority, not by what they hear, but what they see in you. You talk down authority, that will be their view of authority. Maybe you're not talking down your own. I think one of the greatest ways we undermine our authority as parents is we undermine the authority of others in our lives. That cop, I don't even use that term in reference to our law enforcement. Referencing, I've picked on you before about our president by just his last name. He's the president of our country. The pastor, the principal, the whoever, mom, dad, they don't call you by your first name. I hope they don't. There needs to be a level of respect, and we teach that, and we emphasize that, and we do it ourselves. And so we need to be very careful with that. And I just list a few areas that I think we can demonstrate that. I'm not talking about your kids doing this. I'm talking about you doing this, and they'll pick up on that. Number one, jot these down if you will, things that are superior to you that you can model respect for. Your Bible. How much authority do we have if the Bible is not our authority? That's where our foundation or the grounds by which we can stand and say, I am your dad, I am your mom, I am your grandparent, I have some responsibility to you. 1 Corinthians 11:1, be ye followers of me even as I am of Christ. And you connect what you're doing and what you're asking of them to the Bible. If your home is regularly doing things that are antithetical to the Word of God, you will not develop a respect for authority in your family and in your kids. Is God's Word does it always trump your opinion and your agenda? Do you put God first as you see it demanded in Scripture? All right, number two, jot this down to your spouse. We can emphasize wives submitting to your husbands, but Ephesians 5:21 says we submit one to another. I think in the home it's less about, I do believe that God has placed the man in authority in the home. I'm not undermining that. But there are areas that are the wife's responsibility. She's the one in charge in that area, and I think the husband should defer to her in that and submit to that and support that. And so we ought to teach our kids that, by our example, that we respect our spouse. Some of you, I think if you're not careful, you're saying things about your husband or wife that little ears are hearing. You're not just saying it about them when you're at church or at work or with your family as far as adults, but you're saying in front of your children, and they're picking up on that vibe. You ladies, be very careful what you say about your husband. He ought to be a superhero to your kids, if you know what I mean by that. My wife has to really stretch to make that happen, but it ought to be that feel. And same for the wife. She's the greatest cook in the world. She's not the worst cook, or whatever the specific application. And you be very careful with that to show respect to your spouse. Show their best features. Show their best side. Always emphasize that before your children. All right, third one, in your society. So you show or model respect toward the Bible, toward your spouse. Thirdly, in society. I saw this week one of our churches in our community is putting together cookies. And they got a sign-up list. In fact, they've opened it, I think, even to other churches where you can take cookies to law enforcement. And they're trying to get to every officer in Wayne County. Well, a lot of that's going to involve little hands and feet, isn't it? And modeling that, I think, as the opening illustration, toward the elderly, toward law enforcement, toward other adults that are in their life, and teaching them to have reverence and respect toward those in society. Fourthly, in the church, those who are your superior in the church, maybe that's in teaching or pastoring or deacons or others that have shepherding responsibilities in your life. I heard the other day a story, I don't know, or ushers, I don't know if you've ever had a situation like this develop, but I read a story the other day, I don't know if it's true or not, of an elderly lady who walked into a little country church, and the usher greeted her and said, where would you like to sit? And she said, I'd like to sit on the front row. And usher paused for a moment awkwardly and said, you don't want to do that. I mean, our pastor's boring. I mean, really boring. And the dear lady said to him, she said, do you know who I am? And the usher said, no. And she said, I'm the pastor's mother. Guy paused for a minute and he said, do you know who I am? She said, no. He said, good, that's good. I don't know what your view of this pastor and the authority that God's given to me and others in this church, but can I say you ought to foster that? Can I give you a few practical things? And this only happen if you let me, and others that minister in our church. But would you model to your kids that you actually look for counsel at the local church level? That instead of just reading blogs and talking with just your peers you grew up with or others or just extended family that have known you all your life, but you look for counsel and guidance and maybe even reference something in a sermon or in a growth group or someone in conversation that just encouraged you. Quick verse on that, Hebrews. Would you go there, chapter 13? And I hope you understand this isn't a personal plug. It's just something that we need. And I'm willing to do whatever I can for your family if you let me. But in Hebrews chapter 13, it talks about this idea of respect in the context of the church. And only God can lead you in what that means for you and your family. But Hebrews 13, and if you would please, verse 7, says this, remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation, all right, which is Jesus in verse 8. Go down, if you would, to verse 17. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. And I don't mean to harp on this because this isn't an issue in our church that I'm aware of, but a lot of times there is friction between the authority in the home and the authority in the local church, when both of those are ordained by God. And I think should complement one another and complement one another before our young people. I don't ever remember as a young person, maybe that's why my brothers and I are all in ministry, I don't ever remember there being at least real direct friction between parental authority and church authority. I'm sure there were disagreements and things that we weren't always on the same page on, or my parents and the church were not, but there was a continuity there, and God really fostered that, and through that I developed greater relationship with those mentors that God had in my local church. Teach your children to pray for their pastor, to pray for the deacons, to pray for their missionaries. Teach them to support and to partner with the authority that God has placed in their local church. And then one other example of that that's more peer related. Would you go to Romans 12? And this might help you if you struggle with this before your kids. Romans chapter 12, and if you would please, verse 10. All right, just one more here. We're almost done tonight. A couple more thoughts and we'll finish. But Romans 12, and if you would please, verse 10. After talking about the spiritual gifts, we touched on this last time, that we're seeking to manifest ourselves and develop, and also develop in our children. Verse 10, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love. All right, that sounds good. And then notice the end of the verse. In honor, preferring one another. In honor, preferring one another. We're not just talking about top down or bottom up, I guess, kind of respect in the church. We're talking about just giving honor to one another, respecting one another, each other's perspective and life experience. Not saying we tolerate that which is wrong, but we give each other room. We respect and try to appreciate one another, and we model that before our children. Can I encourage you to stop doing this if you're doing it, or protect yourself from starting? If you jump in the car and the first thing you start talking about are people in the church that aren't right with God and that messed up something that you were trying to do or fix something, and if their little ears and eyes hearing and seeing that will hurt them. That will develop a complex. That will develop a cynicism toward the local church. Don't ever slip into that. Always model to them that you honor and respect those that God's put. If God's put you in this church, and He's put me in this church, then we should respect that we're meant to worship and serve together and reach the world for Christ. All right, and then the last one, number 5. So I gave you the Bible, your spouse, society, the church, and lastly, your children. You need to give respect to your children. Listen, your child was made by God. If they've yet to be saved, or if they are saved, God also has sent His Son to die on a cross to be their Savior and deliver them from hell. They have value because God made them and God wants to save them. You have no right to mistreat them, to embarrass them, to call them out. I think in discipline, that'll always be done in private. I hope that's kind of obvious. But just things that we do, give your child some understanding and give them some respect like you would want. The golden rule applies in parenting as well. And so be very careful in that, how you administer. Don't ream them out or tell some embarrassing story about them nowadays online or just between you and a friend. That's out of bounds if it's something that they would not want. And so give some respect to your children. They will notice that, they will appreciate that, and they will reciprocate it. All right, lastly, go if you will back down to verse 9 in our text back in Ephesians 6. How else can we model respect? Verse 9. And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. Lastly, we model respect with those who serve us. My wife and I have talked about this many times, but we have noticed with those who are very affluent that anything can be bought, and therefore any person is just a means to an end. Have you ever noticed that with the wealthy? If you're wealthy, I hope this isn't true of you. We need to talk later about some needs in the church. I'm just kidding. But if you notice that those who are especially exceedingly wealthy, that they tend to treat people as just kind of like a Coke machine or an inanimate object, something that's a means to an end. And you probably don't have a lot of servants. I don't know how many high rollers or movers and shakers we have in here tonight, but for most of us, I'm just talking about normal day life where we're paying someone to do something, where we're the one controlling the narrative. How do we treat those people? Are we giving them respect, and are we doing it in a way that's a servant type of tone as opposed to a demanding tone? Christ came not as a master, but as a servant. But may I remind you tonight, he is still our master, and we will ultimately answer to him for how we handle those who are under us. I remember several years ago reading a quote that's been a challenge to me with the little bit of responsibility God's given me in leadership. And someone said this, quote, "You can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him." And I think where our character shows is not how we treat those above us who can maybe give us something, promotion or advancement or whatever. How do we treat those underneath of us? Starting with our kids and maybe their peers and others around us, how do we treat those who are serving us? May I say tonight, you have the ability as a parent to strengthen or to hollow out the profile of other leaders before the eyes and hearts of your children. And here's the truth I would give you, and then I'll give you a few practical things and we'll be done. I believe today too many kids are growing up cynical toward authority. You want to know why? Because they see their parents using people. They see their parents using them. They see their parents using others, and there's not a level of respect. And because of that, now all authority is out to get me and to ruin me and to manipulate me for their agenda. We need servant leaders. We need leaders who are humble, leaders who graciously serve and minister to even those who, quote, are under them. All right, lastly, let me give you a few things of homework. And I don't think I put this on the slide tonight. No, I didn't. Let me give you just a few things, maybe jot down one or two that God convicted you about tonight. These would be things you can go home and work on. Number one, study the concept of honor in the Bible with your kids. All right, and I'll repeat these a couple times. Study, I usually put them on the slide, study the concept of honor in the Bible with your children. Read the verses, memorize them, seek to apply them. Don't just lecture them about being disrespectful. Have the longer view, be more thorough, go to the scriptures and bring it back to application. Study the concept of honor, that word in the Bible with your kids. Number two, praise your children for demonstrating respect. When you see them, and like I mentioned, especially try to find times where they're respecting someone else. Hey, I saw you, even when the coach didn't understand the full story or the teacher didn't know the back, you still were respectful. You still handled it in the right way. And you reinforce that respect with praise. That's a key thing. Praise your children for demonstrating respect. Thirdly, this one I thought was a great idea, and not original with me. Talk to your children about people who do respectable things. Make them the heroes. Don't talk about the bum who got kicked out of the pro league, whatever, again, for drug use. Put forward heroes that are people that have respect, and they demonstrate that respect even when it is not the norm. Talk to your children about people who do respectable things. Here's what a respectable person does, and I just heard about a guy that did this. Just saw someone in the store or in line that let this lady go first, or whatever the case may be. Talk about them, talk them up. Two more. Teach your children to write thank you notes to their authorities. That's a key one. My one son just got a bike from a guy, a free bike that a bigger bike, and this gentleman takes bikes. We gave him our son's littler bike, and he's going to fix it up and give it to some other kid. But he's a sweet elderly man. He does that now. His retirement is he refurbishes bikes and then just hands them out to kids. And one of the things that immediately, can I get his address? And have my son write him a thank you. That's teaching gratitude and respect, not just I'm entitled to whatever. Thank you for this, thank you for that. And that's a real practical one. Little things. Thank you for teaching my Sunday school class for the last 3 years as I move up to the next grade. Those little things matter. They make a difference. Last one, number 5. Take on a family project to honor someone in your family, church, or community. Take on a family project to honor someone in your family, church, or community. Find someone together that you can give a little bit of honor to. And you've been so good to our family. I see what you're doing in the church. Some of our senior saints that may not as actively have responsibilities, but I mean, just think of Brother Joe and Miss Wilma just faithfully standing with their limited physical capacity and just serving week after week. And that's someone that we could encourage, whoever it is. But take the time to take on someone to just show a bit of respect collectively together in your family, church, or community. Take on a family project to honor someone in those settings. All right, as we finish tonight, I give you this illustration just to kind of capture what we're after this evening. There was a story of a gentleman who was a British weightlifter, and according to the story, lifted the most weight ever in human history, at least since we've been keeping track. Not this past weekend, but the weekend before, he lifted 1,102 pounds. I don't know if you know what a clean is or not. There's different power lifts and things, but he lifted over 1,000 pounds. What was crazy about the story was not just that, it was so much weight that literally the stress upon his body was so intense that he burst a bunch of blood vessels on his head. And he survived. They had to come in and intervene with some medical attention. And after he came to, think about the sheer tenseness and intensity that must have been on his body. But he said this, the pressure in my body was surreal. I passed out. It's not healthy to do something like this. That was his conclusion. Can I tell you that the mantle and the weight of authority in our child's life, it will ultimately win the day. And if our children fight against it, it will be the most unhealthy mindset and unproductive tone that they can set in life. And we need to work in our homes to set them up for success in this area of respect. I end with a quote that I think challenges us because I think most of us are a bit concerned about the teenage years. A lot of us have kids still in primary or younger age. And this, I think, maybe will encourage you of the significance of what you're doing right now if you have young people in your home that are either teens or younger. The author said this, the years of a child's life that we most commonly associate with disrespect, teen years, are often not the beginning of the disrespect in their hearts. A 6 or 7-year-old child usually feels more dependent upon his parents than a 16 or 17-year-old, and thus it is less likely to show overt rebellion, even though the seeds of disrespect may be already growing in his heart. And then he concluded with this is why it is vital to cultivate respect in your child's heart while they are young. You may think right now your child is doing okay, but can I tell you, they may be just a compliant rebel. They may just be a passive rebel. And it's key that we root out the seeds of this in an early age. For those of you who have teenagers, today's the day to start on that and work on that and model that before them. As we finish, can I ask you to think on these 3 areas? Are you committed in your home to expecting respect? You don't ignore it. I've seen parents literally ignore what was just said or done that was highly disrespectful and just pretend it didn't happen. You need to expect it. You have every right. It's a commanded thing that you expect respect of your children. Number 2, are you willing to reward it? Make it an emphasis, not, hey, great job on the T-ball trophy, great job on the respect front. And thirdly, you're willing to model it. And that's where it's really at, isn't it? They're mimickers. They're masters at it. Why not use that to our advantage as we model respect to those above us and to those beneath us? Let's pray together. Father, thank you for your word tonight. Thank you for the privileges to study it, to teach it. Lord, you know the spirit behind our study is your word and the truths of it. But Lord, it's also from my heart as a pastor, Lord, just to strengthen the homes in this